everyone, or good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are in the world. I hope you are all doing well today, and welcome to this construction clinic. Okay, so who is the ICCP? What are we and what do we do? The Institute of Construction Claims Practitioners is a professional members organization that recognizes those with skills, qualifications, and expertise in the professional management of construction claims. So we have three main objectives. That is to establish international professional standards, to give recognition to those who have the appropriate knowledge, experience, and skills in claims management, and also to help educate those who wish to gain that experience. Okay, and why is there a need for the ICCP when there are so many other construction organizations? Well, quite simply, construction claims have become more and more important in the international construction industry, and people come to claims as a career from many different career paths. We have engineers, quantity surveyors, lawyers, project managers. People come from all sort of aspects of construction, and until the ICCP, there was no institute that specifically recognize those who have that specialist knowledge, experience, and skills to manage, prepare, and respond to claims with the highest level of professionalism. So I will very quickly introduce our steering committee. We have our executive officer, Andy Hewitt, who will shortly be answering your questions. Our elected president, Paul Gibbons. We have three fellows who have been elected by the entire membership: Christian Grosskopf, Mark Watson, and Chadash Bayrak. Nina is the general manager. I am currently filling in for her while she is on maternity leave. Okay, and about the membership, we have three regular levels of individual membership, which is associate, member, and fellow. I won't go into a lot of detail in this, but as with most organizations, each level of membership has its own set of requirements and criteria in terms of experience and education. We also have a student membership and graduate membership for those who are in full-time education or have just recently completed their education and are interested in claims. We also have a corporate membership for consultancies and larger companies that have a dedicated claims department. And what is in it for the members? What do our members get out of their membership? We have a private members area of our website that has a collection of papers, case studies, etc., on claims and construction contract topics. We have collated a list of education opportunities for those interested in higher studies, as well as training opportunities. We have a bookshop which doesn't sell books, but has reviews of the latest industry releases on claims and related topics. We have a growing library of practical templates to help our members both save time and also ensure that their claims are to the highest standard. We have regular CPD opportunities, such as this one, which is a question and answer session, but also on specific topics. We have the ICCP Academy, which is a more technical type of training, which is for members only. We have discounts with several publishers on their books, as well as Claims Class. Our training partner offers a 10% discount to all ICCP members. We have a monthly newsletter to keep our members up to date with what's going on in the ICCP, as well as the industry as a whole. We offer industry exposure in the form of a public listing of our members. Members also receive a certificate of membership as well as logos that they can use as they see fit on their LinkedIn profile, CVs, website, wherever they feel appropriate. We have a private LinkedIn group for members to discuss their contracts and claims questions in a confidential setting. We have the optional membership benefit of the Register of Claims Practitioners, which is generally used by consultants or those in private practice who would like to increase their web profile. I know that was very fast. If you would like to learn more, please get in touch with me, jennifer.smith@instituteccp.com. Additionally, if you would rather not get in touch with me just yet, if you're a bit shy, that's okay. Just the other day, Andy Hewitt and I had a webinar on membership and how to join the ICCP, and that is available on our YouTube channel. And with that very whirlwind introduction, I will hand this over to Andy. Good morning.
Thank you, Jen, as always, for a great introduction. I would like to encourage anybody that's dealing with claims on a regular basis and you're not already a member. This webinar, by the way, is for members and it's for anybody else. We do a lot of webinars which are in-house for our members, but we do the occasional one for people who are not members. But you know, if you are involved in claims to a fairly large degree, I would encourage you to at least explore and think about becoming a member, because you know, as a claims practitioner of many years standing, I remember what it was like in the early days when I was finding my way around claims, and you know, I really did need help. I was eventually in a very fortunate position that I went to work for a claims specialist consultancy, and there were people around me who could guide me and mentor me and teach me my craft. If, however, you are stuck on a project and you've got that responsibility and you need some help and guidance, well, the ICCP is going to give you that. And if you are already experienced, we'll give you a designation, an associate member or fellow of the ICCP, which really does mean something in the industry. So without further ado, let me just go on a little bit. The idea of this construction clinic is we pick a subject and we invite people to pre-submit questions on that subject. We don't actually have any questions on the subject. We ask some questions that are off subject. So instead of answering your questions, I'm going to instead do a quick presentation on the subject of the clinic, which is the changes between the 1999 and the 2017 versions of FIDIC. After the presentation, or during the presentation, please feel free to ask your questions, put them on the Q&A box. If you prefer, we'll have a time at the end of my presentation to take those questions. Or if you prefer, you can put your hand up and you can ask your questions live, and Jen will organise that. So without further ado, let's get on to the good stuff and let me open my presentation. So the subject, sorry, of this construction clinic is obviously FIDIC changed from the 1999 editions, which were pretty robust forms of contract, but not perfect, in 2017. And 5 years later, the industry is beginning to use the 2017 editions of the contract. And obviously it's the way forward. So if you are dealing with contractual matters, contracts admin, contracts management, that it's inevitable that before too long, if you are on the sort of project that FIDIC contracts are used, you will need to know what the 2017 editions have in store for you. So this is a brief presentation on the major changes between 99 and 2017. So let's have a look at what's new. The new forms of contracts, we're talking about in 2017, they reintroduced the new editions of the Red, Yellow and Silver Book. They are more prescriptive. There's more descriptions of the actions you must take as one of the parties. I'm going to talk about parties. The parties are actually the contractor, the employer, but I will include the engineer because the engineer has many responsibilities under FIDIC. So the 2017 editions are more prescriptive. Unfortunately, this means that it's bigger. It's actually, forgive me for the statistics, it's 72% heavier than the old versions. It's got 71% more pages, and that obviously leads to the fact there are significantly more words. So we've gone from 30,000 words to 50,000 words. So it is, if you like, more complex. There are more words in it, there's more to read, but in other words, in many instances, because it's more prescriptive, it's clearer, and FIDIC obviously thought this was necessary. The number of clauses and subclauses has increased slightly, and the format of the contracts are pretty much familiar, similar to those of you who are used to 99. That the layout, the clauses 1 to 20 have now become 1 to 21. But the same clause headings, more or less. Why did FIDIC make the changes? Well, as a result of examining disputes, arbitrations, DAB decisions, etc., it was apparent that there were some weak spots in the 1999 editions. Plus, the industry has changed as it does in the years since 1999, sort of 20 years ago. So the FIDIC set out with the new editions to increase clarity, to increase transparency, and increase certainty. So to remove any of those clauses or parts of clauses that could be interpreted in a different way to the intention of FIDIC in the first place. And this will lead to reduced disputes. I mean, we spend an awful lot of money as an industry on resolving disputes. And that is because really the nature of our industry, we're not working in a factory that we produce tables or cars or a product, and we're doing it day in, day out. Every project we work on is different. It's bespoke. So because there's not a lot of repetition, this is where we get the propensity for variations, for changes, for delays, etc., etc. And these often produce difference of opinion, which can crystallize in very costly and time-consuming disputes. And obviously, you know, if we don't have disputed projects, the project becomes a lot more successful. The parties get on with each other. They know what they should do. They know what they shouldn't do. And that all contributes to a good project completed on time, to the right quality, and at the right sort of cost. FIDIC wanted to increase emphasis on dispute avoidance. So there's a lot of what we'll see how this has been done actually, but a lot of amendments which will stop this grey area and give people much more distinct obligations as to what they will do to manage the project. There's a lot more clarity. I say clarity because the claims clause has become very complicated, but the procedure for managing claims has become much more prescriptive. And now there's a mandatory referral of disputes to the DAAB. And you'll notice the DAB is now not a DAB, it's a DAAB. I presume it's pronounced DAB, but it's a Dispute Avoidance and Adjudication Board. So what remains the same? Well, the risk sharing, as you probably know, that the yellow and red books are a balanced risk allocation. With the silver book being produced, it's an EPC contract produced specifically for the sort of clients that are really only interested in an outcome in terms of price and time and performance, and want to put a lot of the risk for getting there onto the contractor. And they accept that they will pay a higher price for the contractor accepting the risk. So the risk allocation is pretty much the same as it was in 1999. The colours of the books: the red book is designed by the employer and remeasurable. The yellow book is designed by the contractor with balanced risk, and the silver book is a complete EPC turnkey contract again designed by the contractor, with less risk put on the employer. As I alluded to earlier, the clause structure with a few amendments, including the taking away of what used to be called employers' risk events and force majeure, and combining them into one clause because they were very, very similar. We've still got instead of 20 clauses, we've now got 21 clauses. And this is to reflect and I always thought it was a strange thing in 99 that claims which are not disputes were dealt with in the same clause, clause 20, which deals with disputes. Now, a claim is not a dispute until it can't be agreed. So I think FIDIC have followed my advice and they've separated. We now have clause 20, which is solely involved with claims, and clause 21, which deal with disputes, and separates that to make that separation. So what are the main changes in 2017? There are many, many more notice requirements from both parties, significantly the contractor and the engineer. When something happens, or something is about to happen, or something has happened, or the one party has an opinion on something, they are required to record that formally under a notice. The employer and the contractor's claims, in 99, there were separate clauses that dealt with the procedures for employers and contractors' claims. They've now been treated the same way, and they both included under clause 20, and they have the same procedural rules, and they have the same time bars. If you remember, in 1999, there was no time bar on an employer's claim. And one of the things that happened, this is a good example, is that contractors would put their claims in through the project. The engineer would leave the claims and ignore them and not respond to them. Then we get to the end of the project, and not only would the engineer reject all the claims that had been sat on his desk for several months, but they would come up with a load of, often, it must be said, spurious employers' claims against the contractor as a form of defence. It's not fair. It's not what FIDIC intended. Well, now FIDIC are preventing that from happening. So a good example of how things have improved. There are many deeming provisions. And what do I mean by a deeming provision? It means that if a party doesn't act within a certain time frame, they are deemed to have taken this action, or their opinion is this. And this is, it must be said, is aimed at the engineers who had an obligation in 1999, didn't perform that obligation because, or well, maybe not because they didn't know it was an obligation. They didn't want to perform the obligation. They didn't know how to perform the obligation, so they ignored it. And this caused problems, significant problems. So now FIDIC is saying, if the engineer has an action to take, we've introduced a time frame, and if he doesn't take that action, he is deemed to have done whatever the clause says. And a good example of this is that if the engineer doesn't respond to a contractor's notice of claim within a certain time frame, he is deemed to have accepted it, and accepted it as a valid notice. Now, that we've also introduced, and I'll go on with the same example, is that the other party may give a notice if a deeming provision comes into force and the party disagrees with its outcome. Let me explain. The contractor is required to give a notice of claim within 28 days of the event. The engineer is required to give a notice if he doesn't consider that the notice has been submitted within 28 days of the event. If the engineer doesn't give that notice within, I think, 14 days, he is deemed to have accepted the notice as valid. Now, if he doesn't act, the employer now has a right to give a notice to say, Mr. Engineer, you didn't give notice that the contractor's notice was not submitted within the time frame. Here is a notice that gives our opinion that it was not submitted in the time frame. So there's a catch. There's a catch-all situation where the other party can act even if the engineer doesn't. It sounds a bit complicated, but you can soon get your head around it. There are many new well, there are not many, there are some new definitions which I think were overdue. Notice now becomes a defined term. One of the big disputes under 99 was what did a notice look like? Was it something that was sent by email? Was it a record in site meeting minutes? Was it a letter? And claims consultants like myself have spent many happy hours arguing that, of course, it was a notice. A notice is just an exchange of information. So because it didn't say notice on the top of the communication, doesn't mean to say it wasn't a notice. And yes, it was submitted within 28 days. It was grey. People took advantage when they hadn't submitted a notice to argue that other communications comprised a notice. But now FIDIC have stopped all that, and they've said in order for it to be regarded as a notice, it must be identified as a notice, and it must refer to the clause that requires that notice. So it's very, very clear now. A claim has been defined where it previously wasn't. A dispute has been defined. Cost plus profit is a new definition, and it means basically the cost to the party of completing the work, costs incurred, and plus profit means a pre-agreed percentage on the actual cost incurred. And there's now, to reflect the, I suppose, uses in the industry, the courts have often said that no objection, which a lot of people like to use because they feel it's not really committing themselves. No, I don't have any objection to that. Is a bit lighter than saying, yes, I approve that, I agree to that. So they sort of like to keep on the fence by not being direct in their no objection. So FIDIC have sort of taken this into account, and they've defined a notice of no objection. The courts in the past have said that no objection really means approval, agreement. So, well, now we know. FIDIC says no objection means whatever it says. Another big thing that the parties would spend hours arguing about is what's the percentage profit to be added to cost when we're talking about a claim for cost plus profit, or a variation where new items are built up from the cost of the labour, plant and materials. What do we add on to that for profit? Well, we've now got a pre-agreed percentage, which should be included in the contract data, which is, for the Red Book, replace the appendix to tender. So we've pre-agreed that. So it's removed all these arguments, which could go on for months and months between quantity surveyors, whether it should be 7.5% or 7%. And there's a default part. If we forget to put that in the contract data, it's a statutory 5%. Let's just have a look at clause 1.3, notices and other communications. It is important. I've talked about it a little bit before. A notice shall be identified as a notice, and please note the capital N to show that it's a defined term. The notice shall include reference to the provision of the contract under which it's submitted. A notice shall have effect when it's received. So it's not the date that you write it and send it, it's the date that it's received by the party to whom it's addressed. And there are various rules for different forms of communication. Those of you familiar with the 1999 edition, they are very strict on the way that a notice shall be transmitted, and also on the method of delivery. So could be by hand, could be by courier, could be by mail, could be it by email or electronic communications. And there are definitions in to say when a notice is deemed to have been received, if it is sent by electronic means. If it's delivered by hand, it should be receipted, and that becomes the date when it has effect. The role of the engineer. One of the things that a lot of people had problems with, particularly engineers themselves, was because in 1999 it wasn't very clear whether the engineer, when making a fair determination, was still acting on behalf of the employer. It is a provision in FIDIC that the engineer is there to protect the employer's interests. And we have many employers who are sophisticated developers that are very well aware of contractual responsibilities and the construction process. But we have a lot of employers who know nothing about construction. They just want something building, and they want a facility, a building, a plant, a road to be operating in the way that they want it. So the engineer is employed to look after those people as a professional in the industry. But when it comes to making fair determinations, deciding on possibly contentious issues, the engineer had a role to become fair and impartial when carrying out those responsibilities. So now in subclause 3.2, the engineer's duties and authority, and in 3.7, agreement or determination. Excuse my typos on this. It does make it clear that the engineer remains the employer's agent, except when making determinations where there is an obligation for the engineer to act neutrally between the parties. So on the one hand, most of the time the engineer is acting on behalf of the employer, except when carrying out responsibilities of agreeing or determining a matter, when he shall act fairly and neutrally in accordance with the contract. And the engineer under 2017 FIDIC has many more time limits to perform obligations, and also for the issue of determinations. This is one big problem that I've noticed really for many, many, many years. Obviously, FIDIC have noticed it through the examination of the causes of disputes. So these engineers who want to take the easy life and not act, not do things, not get off the fence and make decisions, they will find that they are placing the employer in jeopardy by not performing their obligations within a time frame. And as we've already said, if you don't perform your obligations within the time frame when it's specified, in most cases you are deemed to have done something. For example, if you don't respond to a claim within a certain time frame, you are deemed to have rejected it. Therefore, the contractor can take the next step and can refer the matter to a dispute. Claims, my favorite subject. We've already said that the employer and contractor's claims are now subject to the same procedure. There are some increased procedural rules in this, and it has actually become a very complicated clause. Personally, I think it could have been simplified, and it would be advantageous if it were simplified. I think the procedure itself is fine, but the way that it's drafted, I suspect the lawyers have been, well, I know that anything that's drafted by FIDIC is ratified by construction lawyers, but it has become quite a difficult clause to understand, and you've really got to take it step by step by step. But I'll give you the bare bones of the changes. The engineer is now obliged to give a notice if he or she considers that a notice of claim does not comply with the 28-day period. The clause 20 is broken down into many sub clauses, if you like. One of the definite improvements is that FIDIC now give more details of what shall be included in a fully detailed claim. This is a major step forward because one of the leading causes of disputes was inadequately expressed claims from contractors. And what this really means is the contractor had a good claim, but did a really bad job of presenting the claim or explaining the claim. They didn't include enough information, they didn't explain things properly, and therefore the engineer, acting impartially, had to reject the claim because he or she had not been convinced that the contractor was entitled to either anything or the amount that he was claiming. So this guidance now of what you must include in your claim is welcome. The time period for the submission of a claim has been extended to 84 days. I disagree with this. I think claims should be dealt with and agreed as the project progresses. And except for some really very few really complicated matters, I don't see a problem in preparing and submitting a claim within 42 days if the contractor actually starts to work on the claim as soon as he realizes that a claim situation has arisen. The problem is that contractors tend to leave the claims. So I don't think that extending the submittal period to 84 days is going to improve anything. I would be more inclined to include penalties if the contractor didn't submit within a certain time frame. Part of the claim is what FIDIC call a statement of the contractual and or legal basis of the claim. And that has to be submitted within the 84 days. So what FIDIC is saying here is that you don't even have to submit your fully detailed claim within 84 days, so long as you submit a statement of the contractual and or legal basis of the claim. Personally, I think this is a retrospective step, just sending a letter to say we are entitled to an extension of time because this happened and clause whatever says we are. Within 84 days, do you really need 84 days to put that down and send that? And then you don't even have to submit the detailed particulars of the claim, and nothing happens if you don't. I'm really quite passionate about this, and I think this is a retrograde step, not a forward step. However, if the contractor doesn't give the statement of the contractual and or legal basis of the claim, within that time, the engineer is obliged to give a notice if it's not being complied with. Once the claim has been submitted, and here is an enhanced obligation of the engineer. If you remember in '99, there was no time frame for the engineer to respond to claims. And that allowed them to just ignore them until the end of the project. And then, of course, when the employer's got what he wants, is the contractor's power, if you like, has been reduced. The employer, if he wishes, can say, well, I just don't agree with these claims, so sue me. As I say, this is another reason why I believe that claims should be settled as the project progresses. But the engineer's now got an obligation to consult with the parties and attempt to reach agreement on the claim within 42 days. If the parties and the engineer can't agree with the outcome of the claim, so firstly, there is entitlement to make a claim. Secondly, the amount of the claim in terms of time or money. If we can't agree that within the 42 days, the engineer now has to proceed to make a fair determination within a further 42 days. If the engineer doesn't do this, as I've said earlier, I don't think I've included it on the bullet points, the engineer is deemed to have rejected the claim, and then the contractor can follow the dispute procedure. Agreements and or determinations shall be issued by notice by the engineer. This is not a change, but it just helps you to follow the procedure. Dispute adjudication, as I said, now that the DAB is changed from the Dispute Adjudication Board to the Dispute Avoidance Stroke Adjudication Board, a DAB instead of a DAB, I suppose. This is to emphasize that in 1999, there was encouragement for the DAB to help avoid disputes. Now, it's a distinct obligation of the DAB to help avoid. And we've already mentioned that disputes now has its own clause, clause 21, and it's been separated from the claims clause. There's greater emphasis on avoidance, and standing DABs have now been included for all three forms of contract. On question mark yellow, I can't remember, but certainly silver. If you had a dispute, you would then appoint the board, and the board was appointed to adjudicate on that particular dispute. The Red Book and possibly the Yellow Book in 1999, apologies for not remembering the details, the board was appointed at the beginning of the project and was there to give advice. It was there to help avoid disputes. And either of the parties could come and say, hey, DAB, what do you think about this? And get the advice from the three wise men. And then, of course, they were also available to adjudicate and give decisions on any disputes that either of the parties referred to them through the life of the project. Much better than having to start to appoint a DAB when a dispute has crystallized, because the whole appointment procedure can take a couple of months, and then you've got to refer the dispute. So again, standing board is the way to go, I think. There's now a right to either of the parties to terminate if the other party fails to comply with the DAAB decision. So the DAB, having had a decision referred, comes up with their reasoned decision, and the party who doesn't like the decision refuses to comply with it. Well, the other party then can take the nuclear action and terminate the project. So, brief introduction. If you wish to learn more on this subject, the ICCP's training partner, Claims Class, is going to kick off a live online course, the title being FIDIC 2017 versus 1999, What's Changed? That will include approximately 10 hours of training, which will be delivered over a 6-week period. Typically, it will be one webinar per week for 6 weeks. The webinars will take about an hour to an hour and a half, and they will attract CPD certificates for 10 hours for attendees. Starts on the 12th of October, and if you're taking part today or you're listening to the recording of this, Claims Class have very, very kindly, as part of their relationship with the ICCP, worked out a special price for you if you wish to have a look at this course. So have a look, and if you decide that you would like to register, there's a promo code for you which will allow you access to the reduced price. This promotion is only valid to the 24th of September, so you need to act fairly quickly. And to register and have a look at the details of the course, you can look at the Claims Class website, constructionclaimsclass.com. So that brings me to the end of my presentation. So let's open it up for questions, please, on today's subject, which is changes between the 1999 versions of FIDIC and the 2017 edition. So this is where I asked Jen to guide me a little bit. Do we have any questions, Jen?
We do have a couple of questions. We did also get a couple submitted in advance that are not related to the topic, but we generally start with ones asked in advance. But would you like to save those for the end, or how would you
Well,
like to do that?
I think we've got 15 minutes, so let's deal with the questions that are on topic that have been submitted today, and if we have time, I'll deal with the ones that weren't on topic.
All right. Well, I think we have one that is clearly on topic, which is, has there been any significant change in FIDIC 2017 pertaining to clause 13.1, like in a lump sum contract? Can we take the new rates, or do we have to take the BOQ rates?
13.1 is the variation clause. So when evaluating a variation, we need to use the contract rates, usually from the bill of quantities, unless there is good reason that those rates are not applicable to the variation. And FIDIC lists changes in quantity, the various things that could be taken to agree a new rate. And I have to say that whilst there are some detailed changes, Prashant, the 2017 editions pretty much follow the same principles as 1999 when it comes to evaluating variations and when new rates would become applicable. The useful thing is that now when we've built up a new rate from cost, at least we don't have to argue about what should be the profit to add to it, because that's been pre-agreed and should be recorded in the contract data. So I hope that helps, Prashant.
Okay. We do have one that I think is just a really quick question, so I'm going to take it out of order. In the FIDIC 1999 Red Book, if the engineer does not respond to a claim within the 42 days, is the claim deemed rejected or accepted by the engineer?
Yeah, a good question. Unfortunately, in 1999, the engineer had an obligation to respond within 42 days, but there was no recourse if he didn't, and this encouraged engineers to do nothing. And I've already mentioned it a couple of times. You know, many engineers just leave all the claims and ignore them until the end of the project, and then the employer and the engineer try to force the contractor into doing some sort of lump sum horse trade deal, which inevitably doesn't come out very favourably for the contractor. So it's not deemed rejected, or it's not deemed accepted in 1999. It is just left hanging, which was obviously a bad thing, and that's why it's been corrected in 2017. If you are in that position, I would bombard the engineer with copies to the employer to say, we submitted this claim on this date. The day under clause 20.1, which the engineer should have, or you should have responded, Mr. Engineer, was this. This date is passed. We would request that you perform your obligations without further delay. And I will be sending that letter every month. I would be bringing the matter up at any meetings that we have, and just keep the pressure on the engineer to perform his obligation. It's not an option, it is an obligation, even though there are there's no recourse if he doesn't perform that. So I hope that helps, Miss or Mr. Anonymous attendee.
We have another question there that is on topic. What about force majeure clauses in 2017, especially in view of COVID delays?
Well, force majeure now, this is one of the changes to the clause, the contract structure and the clause numbering. Force majeure pretty much remains the same, but it also includes what was employers' risks in 1999. And so the employer's risk and the force majeure clause has been combined into a clause called exceptional events. But it would deal with things like COVID, for example, natural catastrophes, all those sort of things that may happen, but don't happen very often. Riot, disturbance, taking over of government, explosions, volcanoes, natural disasters, etc. So they're all included in the one clause. There are not too many differences between 99 and 2017 in principles in the clause now, the exceptional events clause, which would deal with things like COVID. So COVID delays, there is nothing in 2017 that actually give you entitlement to claim. This is from memory, don't quote it 100%, for a mass epidemic, a pandemic. Your entitlement in 2019, and I believe it still remains the same in 2017, is under clause 8.4, which I think is now 8.5. But basically, it's the extension of time clause, which gives you entitlement to an extension of time in the case of mass epidemic or government action. So I don't think really much changes there. You're entitled to time, but not to the payment of costs. So I hope that answers your question. I'm sorry if I'm not 100% sure of this.
Okay, thank you.
This, of course, is why we encourage people to submit the questions in advance, so I can do the research before.
Well, speaking of the questions submitted in advance, let's jump to those. These are all to do with FIDIC Red Book 1999. The first question is, in subclause 13.1, right to vary states that the contractor shall not make any alteration and or modification to the permanent works unless and until the engineer instructs or approves a variation. But subclause 13.3, variation procedure, states that the contractor shall not delay any work whilst awaiting a response. These two statements seem contradictory to me. Could you please clarify?
Yeah, it's a fairly simple one, and this is this is where an experienced contract administrator, somebody who's taken training on the contracts, would and I'm not being derogatory or anything or disrespectful here. It's just one of those things. It's fairly simple if you know your way around the contract. This refers to when a proposal has been requested for a variation. So the engineer asks the contractor to submit a proposal. The contractor submitted it, but the engineer has not approved it or given instructions to carry the variation out. So we're in this limbo period. The wording in the clause, which the contractor shall not delay any work whilst awaiting a response, doesn't refer to the variation work because it doesn't exist. The engineer's not instructed it. It refers to the work in the original scope. So this prevents the contractor from saying, well, we submitted a proposal to vary this particular part of the works. Maybe we should stop work until the engineer just tells us whether he wants to go ahead with it or not. No, you're not supposed to do that. You're supposed to continue with the original scope of work until the engineer tells you to do it differently. Okay, so that's the meaning there. Okay,
let's get to the next question. Thank you for that. The second part of that question was, in one of my contracts, an overhead cost on-site and off-site has been distributed among all other BOQ items as 7% and profit as 10% on direct cost separately. This means profit is not considered for overhead cost in the original contract value. When we assess cost plus profit for extension of time, can we avoid profit on preliminaries items like staff salaries, site office facilities, head office cost, etc., because such items were not subject to profit in the first instance?
Yeah, I'm not quite sure what you mean, can we avoid profit? I'm sort of assuming that you're speaking from the point of view of the employer or the engineer that want to avoid paying the contractor profit on his costs associated with an extension of time. And I think there's some mixed thinking here. FIDIC is very clear in 99 and 2017 that if we have an extension of time the contractor is obviously going to incur costs, what's usually known as, although it's not a FIDIC term, as prolongation costs. So if we're on site for longer, we have to pay our site management and admin team longer. We have to have our site establishment to pay for longer. We have plants, vehicles, insurances, bonds, head office overheads, would all have to be paid for the extended period of time. So that is a cost associated with the extension of time. And FIDIC's very clear. It says you can claim for cost with a capital C. And FIDIC defines cost as actual cost incurred. So it's not a price in the contract, in the bill of quantities, it's actual cost. If you had to employ your project manager for an extra 30 days, what is the actual cost in terms of salary, holiday pay, flights, medical insurance, pensions, company car, etc., for employing that project manager for that extra 30 days. So cost is a thing that has to be calculated. And of course, FIDIC will then say whether you can claim just for costs or costs plus, in 99, reasonable profit. So then we've got to add to the cost reasonable profit. So in 1999, you've got to argue what reasonable profit is. In 2017, it will be pre-agreed and recorded in the contract. So I hope that helps.
Okay, thank you. All right, moving on to the second set of questions submitted in advance. According to FIDIC Red Book 1999, the interim payment certificates for works done and variations are certified for payment. Conditions allow the engineer to reduce the amount of the payment certificate. I refer to the variation amounts toward the additional works completed, and amounts were certified and paid as work was done. How come thereafter the engineer unilaterally reduced the amounts so certified? Can the contractor refuse to accept reduced payments? What can the contractor do to address this? And is there any time limit which would stop the engineer from unilaterally reducing the payment certificate? So that's a few questions in one there.
Yeah, that's fine. I'm a little bit confused because the question says, I'm sorry, I do have the written question in front of me. This is why we encourage people to submit the questions in first. It says the engineer to reduce the amount of the payment certificates. I don't, the engineer will issue a payment certificate. Why he would want to reduce it or can reduce it, I don't know. Maybe the question means reduce the amount of the payment application when the engineer makes the certificate. So I'm going to assume that is the intended meaning. So this is when the contractor carries out variations, is maybe submitted his variation evaluation, even though the engineer has got the obligation to do that, and includes the price of the variation in accordance with the work that's been carried out with the variation within his payment application. That's the scene that I'm assuming we're talking about. So let's have a look. FIDIC 1999, clause 14.3 applications allows variations to be included in the contractor's statement. So if you've done 25% of the variation work, you should be able to include 25% of the cost of the variation in your application. Clause 14.6, which is the clause that deals with the issuing of the interim payment certificate, the engineer is to issue an interim payment certificate stating the amount the engineer fairly determines to be due with supporting particulars. So if you have done 25% of your variation work, the engineer should fairly certify 25% of the value. Now, if he considers that you haven't done 25%, you've only done 10%, that's fine, if he's acting fairly, and he needs to inform you of that in his supporting particulars. If he considers that you've unfairly or you've inflated the value of the variation because it's not been agreed at this point, it's an interim valuation, again, he can reduce it to what he fairly considers is a fair and reasonable value. But he must give you reasons for this. So what I suspect is happening is the engineer is just saying, I'm not paying for anything in variations because we've not agreed the cost, or you've asked for 100 and I'm just going to give you 50 just because I can. Well, you can't actually, Mr. Engineer, because if you are not acting fairly. So what can be done? There is no recourse here. Again, this is Andy advice. Firstly, I would send a notice to the engineer if you consider that he's under-certified your variations. Obviously, if a notice, you copy it to the employer and set out exactly why you consider the reduction in the interim payment certificate to be unfair and to be a breach of the engineer's obligations. Now, this is not a contractual thing, but this is just good contract management or project management. Don't sit back and let the engineer treat you unfairly. Immediately hit him with a formal, if you like, complaint. I would do it in the form of a notice and copy the employer. We've got to remember on some projects, it could be the employer that's encouraging the engineer to do these, to perform these unfair acts, but just let them know that you won't stand for this. You don't really have a lot of recourse, but just make a noise, make the biggest noise you can and get it recorded.
Have a follow-up question to the question about 1999. If the claim is not accepted or rejected within 42 days, you answered that about 1999. Now a follow-up. In 2017, FIDIC, if the engineer or contractor did not reply within 42 days for a claim submitted, is it deemed to be accepted or rejected?
In 2017, the engineer has got 42 days to attempt to reach agreement on the claim. And if that can't be achieved, or if the parties say we can't agree with this, then 42 days to issue a determination. After the 42 days for the determination, the contractor can just refer the matter. FIDIC says that the engineer is deemed to have rejected the claim. So if he doesn't act within the 42 days, he's deemed to have rejected it, and the contractor, the claimant, because it could be the employer actually, doesn't happen too often, it could be, can just go straight into the dispute procedure and refer the matter to the DARB.
Disruption is not defined in FIDIC 1999, but used in two places, subclause 1.9, delay in drawings or instruction, and subclause 8.5, delay by third parties. Is this inaccurate usage? Whether this has been corrected in FIDIC 2017?
That's the sort of detail that I would, again, had you submitted this earlier, I would have had a chance to look at the contracts. I'm sorry, but I can't carry that sort of detail around in my head, so I can't answer that one. But I will make one point that disruption is very often misunderstood. People often talk about delay and disruption. I've got a claim for delay and disruption. Well, it's almost like the two words are intrinsically linked together. But I just want to make the point is that disruption is a loss in efficiency. You either need more resources to carry out the work in the same time period, or you need the same amount of resources and they take longer to carry out the work. So that's something that disrupts you and causes that loss of efficiency. That may or may not lead to delay. You imagine if you're taking longer to do things, that could delay the time for completion, and that could lead to an extension of time, or it could lead to you, and it would lead to you incurring additional costs. So just want to make the point, the disruption is not always intrinsically linked with delay. So with that, I shall say thank you to you for attending, and as always, thanks to Jen for organising and acting as host. So that's it from me. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for attending. Anyone who did not get their question answered due to time, I do apologize. Please submit them in advance next time. And also, we did get several thank yous for some answers given for Andy. So thank you, Andy. And to everyone who asked for additional information about the ICCP, I will be sending that through to you along with the claims class discount code information, etc. All right, with that, I will thank you all for attending, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. All right, goodbye.